Well, nearly $7 trillion. That's the cost of President Biden's new budget proposal. The White House maintains it will cut nearly $3 trillion from the deficit over the next decade. But opponents quickly criticized its major tax increases. And as CBN's Burke reports, it's expected to go nowhere in a divided Congress.
When it comes to spending, Congress holds the purse strings. While the Senate may be able to push the plan through, the Republican-controlled House has already deemed the budget dead on arrival.
I ran to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up and not the top down.
Biden's budget proposals fall into four main categories: deficit reduction, bringing down costs for families, protecting and strengthening Medicare and Social Security, and investing in America. Many of the president's plans also involve raising taxes, which Republicans call unnecessary.
If you look at the revenue that's coming into America today, it's higher than at any 50-year average. We've only topped this two other times that we've met at the same time. But our expenses are much higher. And if you look, since he's been in office, the added $6 trillion. If you look at the 30% increase in discretionary spending just in the last 4 years, that has been a real challenge. And I think that's where the real problem lies.
Democrats, meanwhile, accuse the GOP of targeting programs that average Americans rely on, like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, to try to achieve a balanced budget.
Their fantastical plan, I call it fantastical, to balance the budget in 10 years would decimate the middle class, decimate the wallets of every American family, and undo the progress we've made over the last 2 years.
McCarthy maintains cuts to those programs are off the table. As Congress argues over how to bring down the national debt, both sides agree something must be done. U.S. debt currently sits at $32 trillion, expected to reach $50 trillion by 2030.
In the next 10 years, Americans will pay $10.5 trillion just on the interest on our debt. Now, to put that in perspective, since 1940 till today, America has only paid $9 trillion in interest. So in the next 10 years, we'll pay more than we paid in the last 80 years.
I'm ready to meet with the Speaker anytime, tomorrow, if he has his budget. Lay it down, tell me what you want to do, I'll show you what I want to do, see what we can agree on, what we don't agree on, let's see what we vote on.
Even before this budget proposal, lawmakers have looked ahead to another money issue, the debt ceiling. With the government set to run out of money by mid-August, the country could default if Congress doesn't raise it, something Republicans say they're unwilling to do until they see some concessions on spending. Burke, CBN News, Washington.
And Gordon, political analysts are describing the proposal more as a campaign document than an actual budget.
Well, I would agree. It is a campaign document, and both parties are politicking off of it. But I've been warning since the deficit first crossed $20 trillion that we were spending ourselves into a hole that even our grandchildren aren't going to be able to dig out of. We've gone off the rails, and at $30 trillion, when you start adding up the interest payment alone, I mean, listen to what the House Speaker said. Over the next 10 years, $10 trillion in just interest payments. That's a phenomenal number. That means before the Congress even meets to consider a budget, you and I have got to come up with $1 trillion in taxes just to pay the interest rate on the previous debt. Now, you can say, okay, well, let's just do that and take that as a cost of moving forward. But if you continue to take the deficit up, and the projection right now is $50 trillion, at what point do the financial markets start to recognize, well, you can't pay that bill. We're not going to buy your bonds anymore. Here's an economic headline. I'm sorry for getting wonky with you, but it's one that may have missed your radar. There's a bank in California that just took a roughly $2 billion hit, and that caused all the banks yesterday on Wall Street to sell off. The reason they took that hit wasn't based on loan losses or trading losses. It was based on they had to restructure their bond portfolio because the bonds they were holding were paying a lower interest rates than the bonds that they could buy in the market today. So that deficit, that hit they took to their capital, was a restructuring of their bond ladders. You know, that sounds esoteric, doesn't it? But it means that every bank in America is having to do that in order to keep up with how much bonds are costing right now. And their older bonds are worth less because the interest rate's being paid less. So as the Federal Reserve is forced to fight inflation, to increase interest payments, and the federal government is issuing bonds now at higher interest rates, that's shaking up everything. That affects you and me on what we pay on credit card interest. It affects you and me on what we pay on a new home loan. If we have to refinance, what does that mean? If we have to take out a loan for home repairs, what does that mean? All of these things will absolutely affect you. But the thing nobody's talking about, if the federal government is unable to pay its interest obligations, well, then our whole currency goes up in smoke. That's a big deal. That affects all of us. And we're all at fault. Republicans, Democrats, we've all contributed to this deficit. We all need to wake up and say, how much government can we afford? Can we afford all these spending programs, all these giveaway programs, all of this stuff? And can we get some fiscal sanity to say, please, can we balance a budget? And can we do it right now? If you have that attitude and you put everything on the table, well, then you'll protect our children, you'll protect our grandchildren. If we keep spending, well, maybe we'll make it through my lifetime without a currency collapse, but we see it coming. And I wish more people would raise the alarm. You can't have this kind of spending go on and on and on without some very serious consequences.